In October 1957, the Soviet Union shocked Americans by sending the first man-made object into space. This was the Sputnik 1 satellite. Although it posed no real danger, many Americans believed that Sputnik 1 was a sure sign that the Soviets had orbiting nuclear ballistic missile capabilities. Because of public pressure, President Eisenhower commissioned the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in 1958 to rapidly develop spacefaring technologies. By this point, the Cold War was in full swing, and the space race was quickly becoming an important facet of this enormous conflict. It was the United States' foreign relations with the Soviet Union that initially began the space race conflict, its escalation, and its perpetuation. Outer space technology in the 50s and 60s was far too limiting to actually make satellite weaponization feasible. But nonetheless, the bragging rights and pride involved with one-upping the other were very important to the Soviet Union and the United States. Between 1957 and 1969, huge strides were made in the advancements of space technology. For the first few years of the space race, the United States was quite a distance behind the Soviet Union. President Kennedy realized this and decided that to maintain public morale, a huge leap ahead of the Soviet Union had to be taken. So in 1961, Kennedy announced that by the end of the decade he planned to send a man to the moon and safely return him.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
In 1969, this was accomplished with the Apollo 11 mission. Many consider this the end of the space race. It is widely accepted that the United States won the space race due to more advanced technology and a better-run space program. The space race was an important launchpad for the furthering of American space technology. It led to a wide array of satellites that are currently in use, an orbiting space station, and various highly successful spacecraft.
Conditions in the 1960s were perfect for the creation and funding of NASA. However, in the last 31,536,000 minutes, or about 50 years, it seems that economic factors, technological factors, and foreign relations have aimed the agency towards privatization.
Well, in the 60s, NASA was very fortunate to have such a well of funding, but since then it's kind of dried up, and so it's a shame. It really is.
The U.S. national debt has been growing quickly in the past decade, and cuts have been made to government programs across the board, with no exception to NASA. Congress has kept NASA spending in check, and it has been lower than 1% of the federal budget for decades now.
Obama recently canceled Project Constellation, saying that it was going to be too much for the federal budget. And Project Constellation would have stimulated new industries and returned astronauts to the moon by 2020. And now NASA spending is less than half a penny on the dollar of the federal budget. I think it's outrageous. It's just half a penny on the dollar.
Yeah, and it's so heartbreaking that an agency like NASA is being cut after 60 years of such great success. It's facing to cut the programs that inspire the hearts and minds of Americans.
Recently, Obama's come up with a new plan for funding that consists of $6 billion that would go to the transportation of aircraft, spacecraft to space, and for private companies, and $500 million of that would go to an incentive program so that the private companies would, compete against each other so that, we'd get more people into space.
In the past, low Earth orbit activities have consumed 2/3 of NASA's budget. Privatization would allow NASA to operate on budget by using commercial companies to handle those activities. Another advantage of privatization is that it would open up numerous new markets within the United States for space activities, expanding the industry and creating jobs.
Another factor that has influenced space exploration's move toward privatization is foreign relations. What? Shout out to Mexico.
Well, since the Cold War is over now and the Soviet Union is no longer pressuring us to, make it to space, there's just the popular interest is lost because there's no competition anymore. So, in the 60s we were all scared of an attack, so we were trying to make it to space.
The Space Shuttle program ended in 2011 with the final flight of Atlantis to the International Space Station. This has created a gap in the ability of America to send astronauts and cargo to and from the ISS, and it would mean that the United States would have to depend mainly on Russia to get us to and from the space station.
Well, the fact that Russia would be our primary way into space doesn't really sit well with politicians and space experts, so I don't know, I think that has a big part in NASA's compliance with privatization. And NASA doesn't want to have anything to do with Russia after, what happened on Apollo 18.
Privatization would ensure that the United States does not depend completely on foreign nations.
Now, the goal wouldn't be to push away all other foreign countries. No, that's not it. It would help improve foreign relations to collaborate with them on projects like these. And during the 60s, we wanted to beat the Soviet Union and win the space race and all that. But now it's apparent that we just wanted to collaborate.
Just as in the 60s, it's still a primary focus to make as many technological advances as possible. Project Constellation was canceled by President Obama because it was lacking innovation and draining resources from other areas of NASA.
So the decision to turn to privatization does indeed satisfy our need for innovation, and also privatization would allow for the collaboration with ESA and countries like Japan and Russia, from which I think we have a lot to learn.
Privatization would allow private companies to join in on this search for knowledge.
Private companies within the United States have the expertise to handle low Earth orbit missions. We've been there. Hello? I see. Yeah. Understand. Goodbye. But the thing about traveling to some place like Mars is that there are unknown dangers and unknown risks at hand, and we've never been there before, and it's just that private companies, not even SpaceX or Orbital Sciences, they just don't have the funding and they don't have the technology to handle missions to Mars, manned missions to Mars, where people can die. And we don't know what's out there.
The history of space exploration in the United States has had many ups and downs. It experienced accelerated development in the 60s during the space race, a relative lull during the period after the space race as a result of the disappearance of foreign competition, and major funding cuts in recent years because of wartime economic demands. NASA budget cuts led to the discontinuation of the Space Shuttle program, and the need for domestic competition created the push for a competent private space industry.
Private companies such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Orbital Sciences are paving the way for an efficient, competitive space exploration industry. The future collaboration of NASA, private companies, and foreign agencies holds the potential for amazing accomplishments such as manned missions to Mars. As Neil Armstrong said on the launch pad of the famed Apollo 18 mission, "Houston, we are clear for takeoff." Shout out to Ben Siegel.